The crystal chandeliers shimmered like stars above the grand ballroom, their light scattering across polished marble floors where laughter and champagne mingled in perfect harmony. It was the annual charity gala at the Langston Hotel, an event that drew the city's wealthiest elite, where designer gowns swept the floors and every conversation reached a status. But amidst that glittering sea of diamonds and arrogance stood her, a young black woman in a simple, elegant cream dress that hugged her figure gracefully. Her name was Naomi, and though her poise rivaled that of anyone in the room, the sharp gazes around her whispered a different story. She wasn't one of them, they decided. The color of her skin told them everything they thought they needed to know. From the corner of the ballroom, Victoria Hensley, a middle-aged socialite draped in emerald silk, watched Naomi with an icy glare. Victoria had built her reputation on control, over her image, her fortune, and people she believed beneath her. So when she saw Naomi standing beside the table of wine glasses, she made an assumption that would soon destroy her life. As Naomi reached for a flute of champagne, Victoria's sharp heels clicked across marble. With an air of disdain, she approached. Her eyes narrowed, voice dripping with superiority. The guests nearby turned their heads, sensing tension before it even began. And then, in one swift, hateful motion, Victoria's hand shot out, grabbing Naomi's sleeve and tearing the fabric down the side. Gasps erupted across the ballroom. The sound of silk ripping echoed louder than the music. Naomi froze, her heart pounding, her breath caught in disbelief. Victoria sneered, eyes flashing with contempt, as if she had exposed someone who didn't belong. But she didn't know. She didn't know who Naomi truly was. She didn't know that the man watching from the balcony, the one whose face turned from shock to fury, was Naomi's husband. And he wasn't just any man. He was one of the most powerful millionaires in the city. The silence that followed the sound of tearing fabric seemed to stretch endlessly, like the room itself was holding its breath. Naomi stood still, her hand still frozen midair where she'd been reaching for a glass. The champagne flute slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering on the marble. The golden liquid spilled across the floor, mixing with fragment of glass and the sound of whispers. Victoria Hensley stepped back, lips curling into a self-satisfied smirk. Her sharp voice sliced through the air, laced with venomous condescension. She didn't apologize. She didn't even hesitate. She believed she had simply put an improper waitress back in her place. Around her, several of her friends looked uneasy. Some pretended not to notice, while others turned away, unwilling to confront the cruelty they'd just witnessed. Naomi swallowed hard, forcing herself not to cry. Her grandmother had taught her that dignity was a crown no one could take unless she handed it over. But in that moment, standing in a room filled with judgmental stares, it was nearly impossible to hold it steady. The sting of humiliation spread across her chest as the torn fabric exposed her shoulder and part her arm. She felt small but not broken, because Naomi wasn't just a guest. She wasn't a server. She wasn't even someone who had stumbled into the wrong event. She was Naomi Bennett, co-founder of the Bennett Foundation for Underprivileged Youth, and the wife of Ethan Bennett, a self-made tech millionaire and philanthropist whose presence commanded entire rooms. Upstairs, on the mezzanine balcony, Ethan had been speaking with the mayor when he saw the commotion. He noticed Victoria's arm reach out, the fabric tear, and the cruel twist of her mouth. Time seemed to slow. Rage boiled inside him, not just because someone had humiliated his wife, but because he recognized that look, that same look he'd seen in boardrooms and private clubs, the same sneer that said, "You don't belong here." Ethan didn't rush down immediately. Instead, he watched. He wanted to see how far Victoria would go, and who around her would stop her. No one did. The silence of the crowd was almost more painful than Victoria's act itself. It reminded him of why he had worked so hard to build his empire, not just for wealth, but for the power to never be dismissed again. Naomi slowly gathered herself, her trembling hands brushing over the torn fabric. She could feel eyes on her like daggers. The pain wasn't just from humiliation. It was from a memory of all the times people had assumed less of her because of her skin. From the time she'd been ignored by sales clerks, to the job interviews where she was not quite the right fit, to this, a public scene designed to strip away her dignity. And yet, she stood taller. She took a deep breath and turned away from Victoria, refusing to meet hate with shame. She started walking toward the restroom, her heels clicking in rhythm with her heartbeat, the remains of her dress trailing slightly. But before she reached the door, a voice in the crowd whispered, "That's Ethan Bennett's wife." The word spread like wildfire. Heads turned. Shock replaced judgment. The same people who had looked down moments earlier now stared with disbelief, their mouths parting as realization sank in. Victoria's smug expression faltered. Her eyes darted around nervously, trying to piece together what she had just done. Naomi disappeared into the restroom, but Ethan was already making his way down the stairs, every step measured, calm, but burning with quiet fury. His face gave nothing away, but his eyes were locked on Victoria. He wasn't a man who needed to raise his voice to be heard. When he spoke, people listened. The gala continued awkwardly, the orchestra playing softer now, as if even the music felt shamed. Whispers filled every corner of the hall. Some guests avoided Victoria's gaze entirely, while others couldn't resist watching the slow, inevitable unraveling of her arrogance. Victoria tried to compose herself, adjusting her jewelry, pretending nothing had happened. But deep down, she could feel something shift, a sense of dread crawling up her spine, like she had unknowingly crossed a line she could never return from. Because Ethan Bennett wasn't just watching anymore. He was preparing to act. And when he did, the entire city would hear about it. The echoes of laughter that had once filled the ballroom now felt forced, thin, and uneasy. The gala's atmosphere had changed entirely, like a storm brewing under glittering lights. Ethan Bennett moved through the crowd with deliberate calm, though his jaw was tight, and his mind burned with images of that single cruel act. As he descended the marble staircase, guests parted for him instinctively. Everyone knew who he was. Ethan had built Bennett Systems, a software empire valued in the billions. But beyond his wealth, his presence carried a quiet authority, the kind that couldn't be bought. His sharp suit, his composed demeanor, and the subtle chill in his eyes made people step aside, without a word. Victoria Hensley, who only moments earlier had stood triumphant, now fidgeted nervously with her clutch. She saw Ethan approach and tried to force a smile, pretending she had no idea who the woman she just assaulted really was. Her friends whispered frantically around her, trying to piece together a defense. But deep down, Victoria's confidence had begun to crack. Ethan didn't speak to her. Not yet. He simply walked past, his eyes fixed ahead, toward the restroom where Naomi had gone. He paused at the door, took a deep breath, and signaled one of the hotel staff nearby to fetch a shawl or jacket. Within seconds, a white blazer was handed to him. He knocked gently on the restroom door and waited. When Naomi stepped out, her face was composed, but her eyes still shimmered with the weight of what had happened. The torn side of her dress revealed the scar she'd once gotten from a car crash years earlier, something she rarely showed anyone. Ethan said nothing. He just draped the blazer over her shoulders, his expression softening as she whispered a quiet "thank you." They stood together for a moment, a silent exchange between two people who had weathered far worse storms than this one. But tonight was different. Tonight, the insult wasn't just personal. It was public, cruel, and deliberate. As Ethan led Naomi back into ballroom, every eye turned toward them. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The orchestra faltered. The sight of the city's most powerful couple walking together, with Naomi's torn dress covered by Ethan's arm, sent waves through the crowd. Victoria's face paled. She could feel her world closing in, second by second. The event's host, a nervous man in a tuxedo, rushed to greet them, apologizing profusely, but Ethan brushed him off with a polite nod. He wasn't interested in pleasantries. Instead, he led Naomi toward the center of the room, guiding her with quiet strength. When he finally stopped, he turned slowly, his gaze locking directly on Victoria Hensley. A hush fell. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold still. Victoria's lips parted slightly as if to speak, but no words came. Her confidence, once her armor, had vanished entirely. She was exposed. Ethan's voice finally broke the silence, deep and calm, but filled with authority. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. "You've mistaken kindness for servitude," he said, each word measured and sharp. You saw a woman who didn't look like you, and you assumed she couldn't belong here. A murmur rippled through the audience. The guests knew they were witnessing something rare. Not just power, but moral reckoning in its purest form. Victoria's face flushed crimson. She stammered, I didn't mean... But Ethan cut her off with a raised hand. You didn't mean to be caught, he said quietly. But you did mean to humiliate her. And you did it in front of hundreds of people. Naomi stood beside him, composed and graceful. Her voice didn't tremble when she finally spoke. This isn't just about me, she said, her tone soft but resolute. It's about every woman of color who walks into a room like this and gets treated like she doesn't belong. The audience fell silent again. Some nodded quietly. Others looked away in shame. Victoria's husband, a real estate magnate standing near the back, shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet anyone's eyes. He'd warned Victoria before about her temper, her arrogance, her obsession with appearances. But this time, she'd gone too far. Ethan turned to the event host. Cancel my foundation's partnership with this gala, he said firmly. We'll hold our own charity event, one that actually honors people, not humiliates them. The host nodded, panicking, while photographers at the back of the room discreetly captured the scene. Within hours, this story would spread beyond the walls of the Langston Hotel. Victoria opened her mouth again, desperate to salvage her image. Mr. Bennett, please, this is all a misunderstanding. But Ethan's expression remained cold. A misunderstanding, he repeated. You tore her dress. You assaulted a guest. The only thing misunderstood here is your belief that your wealth or whiteness gives you the right to demean others. Victoria froze. Gasps echoed again. Someone at the bar whispered, She's finished. Naomi gently touched Ethan's arm, a silent signal for restraint. She didn't want the night to spiral into something uglier. She'd already been humiliated once. She wouldn't let that pain define her. Instead, she turned and began walking toward the exit, holding her head high. Ethan followed, his arm protectively around her. The crowd parted again, this time not out of fear, but out of respect. The whispers turned into murmurs of admiration for Naomi's grace, her composure, her quiet dignity that refused to bend. Behind them, Victoria stood frozen in place, her entire social circle melting away. No one wanted to be seen beside her now. Her reputation, built on status and influence, had collapsed in seconds. But the story wasn't over, because what Ethan did next, outside that ballroom, would make headlines across the city and forever change how people treated women like Naomi in circles of power. As they stepped into the night air, Naomi finally exhaled, feeling the cool wind brush against her face. She didn't know yet what Ethan was planning, but she could see it in his eyes, that calm, dangerous certainty that only came when a man like him decided to make things right. The limousine rolled silently through the city's sleeping streets, its headlights slicing through the misty night. Naomi sat quietly beside Ethan, her fingers tracing the edges of the borrowed blazer he had wrapped around her. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a hollow ache, not just from humiliation, but from a familiar sting of being reminded that no amount of success or grace could shield her from prejudice. Ethan's jaw remained clenched. He hadn't spoken since they left the hotel, his thoughts running deep beneath the surface. He'd seen injustice before, in business, in politics, even in friendships. But this had been personal. To watch the woman he loved treated like a servant, stripped of dignity by a stranger who thought her race dictated her worth, it ignited something fierce inside him. As the car slowed in front of their penthouse building, Ethan finally spoke, his tone low but steady. She thought you didn't belong there, he said quietly. Let's make sure the whole city knows exactly who does. Naomi looked at him, reading the determination in his expression. She had learned long ago that Ethan didn't raise his voice. He raised his influence. And when a man like him moved, powerful people paid attention. The next morning, the fallout began. Photos of the gala incident had spread across social media overnight. Blurry at first, but damning nonetheless. One image, in particular, went viral. Victoria Hensley's hand clutching the torn fabric of Naomi's dress. The shock frozen on Naomi's face, and Ethan in the background descending the staircase, eyes locked on the scene. By sunrise, every major outlet had picked it up. Hashtags flooded timelines. Hashtag justice for Naomi. Hashtag gala racism. Hashtag power and prejudice. What Victoria had done in arrogance now stood as a public symbol of everything wrong with the city's elite. Within hours, Ethan held a press conference, not for vengeance, but for purpose. The marble lobby of the Bennett Foundation gleamed under camera lights as journalists crowded in. Naomi stood beside him, her posture straight, her calm unshaken. Ethan began speaking, his voice firm yet controlled. "Last night, my wife was humiliated at a charity gala meant to raise funds for underprivileged children," he said. "She was physically assaulted and publicly degraded, not for what she did, but for what she looked like. That is the reality too many still face in this country." The room fell silent. Cameras clicked furiously, every flash capturing his composed anger. He continued, "This is not just about one woman's cruelty. It's about a system of entitlement and prejudice that thrives in silence. But we are not staying silent. Starting today, the Bennett Foundation will redirect $1 million from that gala's partnership into a new initiative, the Naomi Project, a program to empower minority women in business, leadership, and education." A murmur swept through the crowd. This wasn't revenge. It was transformation. Naomi's eyes glistened. She hadn't known about the project. Ethan had created it overnight, and in doing so, he had turned her pain into power, her humiliation into hope for countless others. By afternoon, the story dominated the news cycle. Interviews, opinion pieces, and debates flooded every platform. Some praised Ethan's measured response. Others dissected what Victoria's act revealed about hidden racism among the wealthy. But one thing was certain, everyone was talking. Meanwhile, Victoria's world crumbled. Her phone rang endlessly. Reporters, former friends, even her own husband, who had fled to their Hampton estate to avoid the scandal. Her face was splashed across headlines with captions that read, "Socialite's racist outburst destroys charity gala." Her luxury fashion brand began hemorrhaging partnerships. Influencers who once posed with her clothes now publicly denounced her. Stores dropped her line overnight. Her name, once a symbol of prestige, became poison in elite circles. But it wasn't just social punishment. Days later, Ethan quietly contacted the hotel's management and informed them that the Bennett Foundation was terminating all future collaborations with events hosted there unless they implemented mandatory anti-discrimination training for staff and partners. The Langston Hotel complied immediately, desperate to salvage its reputation. Victoria tried to issue an apology, a hollow, trembling statement read on morning television, but no one believed it. Her voice cracked, her hands shook, and her eyes betrayed what her words tried to hide. She wasn't sorry for what she did, only for being exposed. Back at the Bennett residence, Naomi watched the broadcast silently. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She only felt an ache for how easily hate could destroy lives, even the lives of those who carried it. Later that evening, she and Ethan sat on their balcony, watching the sun sink behind the skyline. The city that had once felt so vast and cruel now seemed a little smaller, a little less invincible. Naomi turned to Ethan softly. "Do you ever get tired of fighting this?" she asked. Ethan looked out toward the horizon. "Every day," he admitted. "But then I remember who I'm fighting for." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. "And I remember that silence never changed anything." Below them, the city lights flickered on one by one, like a quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted. For Naomi, the night at the gala would never be forgotten, but she had reclaimed it, not as a story of humiliation, but as one of resilience. And as the world continued to talk, she found peace in knowing that her pain had become a mirror for truth. Little did she know, the story wasn't finished yet. The most unexpected twist was still to come, when Victoria herself, desperate and broken, would show up at Naomi's door, seeking something she didn't deserve but couldn't live without: forgiveness. The knock on the door came on a quiet Saturday morning, soft but trembling, the kind of knock that carried hesitation and guilt. Naomi was in the kitchen, watering the small garden of orchids she kept near the window. She froze when she heard it. Ethan was still upstairs finishing a call. so she walked slowly to the door, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Through the frosted glass, she saw the blurred outline of a woman, tall, elegant, but with slumped shoulders. For a brief moment, Naomi's mind flashed back to the sound of ripping silk, to the gasps, to the sting of humiliation. Her pulse quickened. She knew that silhouette. She opened the door halfway. Victoria Hensley stood there, but she was unrecognizable. Gone was the perfectly styled hair, the polished arrogance, the glint of superiority. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. The emerald green she once wore so proudly had been replaced by a simple gray coat. In her hands, she clutched an envelope. "Mrs. Bennet," she began, her voice breaking, "I know I have no right to be here." Naomi didn't speak at first. The sight of the woman who'd publicly humiliated her standing on her doorstep was surreal. The silence stretched uncomfortably, but Naomi didn't feel it. She simply looked at her, not with anger, but with the calm authority of someone who had already healed past the point of rage. "I've lost everything," Victoria continued. "My company, my reputation, my marriage. I can't even walk into a restaurant without someone whispering my name like it's a curse. I came to apologize, not because I want redemption, because I can't live with what I did to you." Her hands shook as she extended the envelope. "This is a written apology and a personal donation to the Naomi Project. It's all I can do." Naomi hesitated before taking it. She didn't open it, just held it quietly between her fingers. There was a time when she would have dreamed of this, an apology, public disgrace, consequences. But now, seeing the broken woman in front of her, she only felt an aching kind of sadness. She spoke softly. "Victoria, what you did hurt me. It humiliated me. And not just me, every person who's ever been made to feel smaller because of how they look. But I learned something that night." Victoria lifted her eyes, confused. "I learned that hate has a cost," Naomi continued. "And forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to rise above it. So it doesn't owe me any more." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly, trembling. "I understand," she whispered. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say it to your face." Naomi gave a faint nod. "You said it. That's enough." Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "Use what's left of your voice to do something good. Don't let this be the end of your story." Victoria exhaled shakily, her lips trembling in gratitude she couldn't express. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing down the path like a ghost fading into morning light. Naomi watched her go, not with satisfaction, but with quiet acceptance. Later that day, Ethan came downstairs, and Naomi told him about the visit. He listened silently, then placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "You did the right thing," he said. "I hope so," she murmured. He smiled faintly. "You always do." They sat together in the garden as the afternoon sun streamed through the glass. Naomi finally opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note, shaky and tear-stained. To Naomi Bennet, "I spent my life believing money and privilege made me superior. That belief cost me everything. You showed me what real grace looks like. I will never forget it. Victoria." There was also a check inside, a large one, made out to the Naomi Project. Naomi stared at it for a long moment, then set it aside. She didn't need to do that, she said quietly. Ethan smiled. Maybe she needed to for herself. Naomi nodded. "Then I'll make sure it helps someone who truly deserves it." And she did. Months later, the Naomi Project opened its first women's business incubator in downtown Atlanta, a modern, sunlit space where young women of color came to learn, build, and grow. Naomi stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, surrounded by journalists, students, and supporters. Her torn dress had long since been mended and preserved, a reminder of how far she had come. As she spoke to the crowd, her voice carried a calm power that silenced the noise of the city. "Sometimes," she said, "the moments meant to break us are the ones that make us unbreakable." That night wasn't just my story. It was a mirror showing how far we still have to go. But it's also proof that dignity, grace, and courage can turn even cruelty into change. Applause rose like a wave. In the front row, Ethan watched her proudly, knowing that her strength had done what no fortune could. It had moved hearts, shifted perspectives, and built a legacy. That evening, as they left the event hand in hand, Naomi looked out over the city skyline, glowing against the night. She thought about everything that had happened, the cruelty, the shame, the redemption. She didn't feel anger anymore, only gratitude, because from that single hateful act had come a movement that would touch thousands of lives. And somewhere far away, a once proud woman sat watching Naomi's speech on television, tears streaming down her face, knowing she'd been part of that change too, even if through her failure. Naomi whispered softly to herself, God always has a way of turning pain into purpose. And as the lights of the city blinked below them, Ethan placed his arm around her shoulders and smiled. You turn a scar into a story, Naomi, and the world listened.